The dust kicked up from the hooves of wild mustangs as they thundered across the open plains of Montana. Sarah Mackenzie stood at the edge of the wooden fence, her green eyes fixed on the magnificent black stallion that led the herd. Thunder, as the locals called him, was a force of nature himself. No man had ever managed to break him, though many had tried and failed. Sarah adjusted her worn leather gloves and pushed a strand of auburn hair away from her face. At 25, she had already earned a reputation as one of the finest horse trainers in 3 counties, but Thunder represented something different. He was wild, untamed, and absolutely beautiful in his freedom. "You're thinking about that devil horse again, aren't you?" came a deep voice from behind her. Sarah turned to see Jake Martinez approaching, his boots crunching on the dry grass. Jake was the foreman of the Double R Ranch where she worked, and at 32 he had the weathered hands and sun-kissed skin of a man who had spent his entire life working the land. His dark hair peeked out from under his black cowboy hat, and his brown eyes held a warmth that made Sarah's heart skip a beat every time she looked into them. "He's not a devil," Sarah replied, turning back to watch the herd. "He's just never met the right person." Jake leaned against the fence beside her, close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of leather and sage that seemed to follow him everywhere. "Sarah, that horse has injured more cowboys than a bull at a rodeo. Boss Patterson lost 3 good men trying to break him last month." "Those men use force," Sarah said firmly. "Thunder doesn't respond to breaking. He needs understanding." Jake studied her profile, noting the determined set of her jaw and the fire in her eyes. He had been watching Sarah work with horses for the past 2 years, ever since she had arrived at the Double R with nothing but a battered suitcase and more skill with horses than most men twice her age. She had a gift that went beyond training. She could communicate with animals in a way that seemed almost magical. "The boss is thinking about selling him to the rodeo circuit," Jake said quietly. "They want him for bucking stock." Sarah's hands gripped the fence rail so tightly her knuckles went white. "They'll ruin him. A horse like Thunder isn't meant for that kind of life." "Then what do you suggest?" Jake asked, though he had a feeling he already knew her answer. Sarah turned to face him fully, her eyes blazing with determination. "Let me work with him. Give me 3 weeks." Jake shook his head immediately. "Sarah, no. It's too dangerous. I won't have you getting hurt because of some wild idea." "It's not a wild idea," Sarah insisted. "I've been studying his behavior for months. I know his patterns, his triggers. I can reach him, and if you can't?" Jake's voice carried a note of concern that made Sarah's heart flutter despite her frustration. "Then I'll accept that some horses are meant to stay wild," she said. Though they both knew she didn't mean it, Jake removed his hat and ran his fingers through his hair. A gesture Sarah had come to recognize as a sign that he was wrestling with a difficult decision. She had noticed many of Jake's habits over the past 2 years. The way he always checked on the newest horses first thing in the morning. How he saved the apple cores from his lunch to give to his favorite moray. Daisy, the gentle way he spoke to frightened animals, using the same soothing tone he used with her when she was upset about something. "Boss Patterson will never agree to it," Jake said finally. "He will if you recommend me," Sarah replied. "He trusts your judgment." Jake looked out at the herd where Thunder stood proud and alert, his black coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. The stallion was magnificent, there was no denying that. But he was also dangerous, and the thought of Sarah putting herself at risk made Jake's chest tighten with an emotion he wasn't quite ready to name. "Why is this so important to you?" he asked softly. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching Thunder move among the other horses with natural authority. "Because I know what it's like to be wild," she said finally. "To have everyone trying to break you into something you're not meant to be." Jake turned to study her face, seeing something in her expression that she usually kept hidden. Sarah rarely talked about her past or what had brought her to the Double R. All he knew was that she had grown up on her grandfather's small ranch in Texas until his death had forced her to make her own way in the world. "Sarah," he began, but she cut him off. "I know you think I'm being reckless," she said. "But sometimes you have to take a risk for something you believe in." Jake was quiet for a moment, watching the way the afternoon light caught the red highlights in her hair. He had been thinking about taking a risk of his own lately, one that had nothing to do with wild horses and everything to do with the woman standing beside him. "If I talk to Patterson," he said slowly, "and if he agrees to let you try, you have to promise me something." "What?" Sarah asked, hope flickering in her voice. "You don't go near that horse unless I'm there," Jake said firmly. "No working with him alone, no matter how well you think it's going." Sarah wanted to argue, but she could see from the set of Jake's shoulders that this was non-negotiable. "Fine," she agreed. "But you stay back unless I need help." Jake nodded, already regretting his decision but unable to deny Sarah anything when she looked at him like that. "I'll talk to Patterson tonight." As they stood there in comfortable silence, watching the horses graze in the distance, Sarah felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. She had been thinking about attempting to train Thunder for months, but she had also been thinking about something else. The way Jake looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The way his hand lingered when he helped her down from the higher fences. The way his voice softened when he said her name. "Jake," she said quietly, not looking at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Shoot. Do you ever think about taking risks? About going after something even when it scares you?" Jake was quiet for so long that Sarah finally turned to look at him. He was staring out at the horizon, his jaw tight with some internal struggle. "Every day," he said finally, his voice so low she almost missed it. "But you don't," she observed. "Some risks are worth taking," he said, finally meeting her eyes. "Others can destroy everything good you've built." Sarah felt her heart racing at the intensity in his gaze. "How do you know the difference?" Jake stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I guess you don't until it's too late." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and possibilities. Sarah found herself thinking about all the times over the past 2 years when she had caught Jake watching her. All the times their hands had brushed while working together. All the conversations that had felt like they were dancing around something neither of them was brave enough to say. Jake began. But the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted him. They both turned to see Boss Patterson riding toward them on his bay gelding, his weathered face set in its usual stern expression. Patterson was a fair man, but a practical one, and Sarah knew convincing him to let her work with Thunder would be no easy task. "Martinez," Patterson called out as he reined in his horse. "I've been looking for you. We need to talk about that black devil and what we're going to do with him." Jake and Sarah exchanged a quick glance, and Sarah saw him straighten his shoulders in the way he did when he was preparing for a difficult conversation. "Actually, boss," Jake said, "I've been thinking the same thing. Sarah here has an idea that might be worth considering." Patterson's eyes shifted to Sarah. Taking in her determined expression and the way she stood with her chin raised, despite the nervousness he could see in her eyes. "Miss Mackenzie," he said with a nod. "What kind of idea are we talking about?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing this was her chance. "Mr. Patterson, I'd like your permission to work with Thunder. I believe I can train him." Patterson's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Train him?" "Miss Mackenzie, that horse has put 2 men in the hospital and nearly killed a third. I'm planning to sell him to the rodeo circuit before he hurts someone permanently." "Sir, I understand your concerns," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "But Thunder isn't vicious. He's intelligent and proud. He's been mishandled by men who tried to dominate him instead of earning his respect." "And you think you can earn his respect?" Patterson asked, his tone skeptical but not unkind. "I know I can," Sarah replied with quiet confidence. "Give me 3 weeks. If I can't make significant progress in that time, I'll accept your decision to sell him." Patterson looked between Sarah and Jake, noting the way his foreman stood slightly protective near the young woman. Jake Martinez was not a man given to flights of fancy, and if he was supporting this idea, there had to be something to it. "Jake," Patterson said, "what's your take on this?" Jake removed his hat again, weighing his words carefully. Boss, I've watched Sarah work with problem horses for 2 years. She's got a gift I've never seen before. If anyone can reach thunder, it's her. And if she gets hurt in the process? Patterson asked bluntly. I'll be supervising every session, Jake said. She won't work with him alone. Patterson studied Sarah's face for a long moment, seeing the passion and determination burning in her green eyes. He had built his reputation on being able to read people as well as he read horses, and everything about Sarah M. The morning sun had barely crested the mountains when Sarah Mackenzie made her way to the corral where Thunder had been separated from his herd. The magnificent black stallion paced along the fence line, his muscles rippling beneath his glossy coat as he searched for an escape route that didn't exist. His dark eyes held intelligence and wariness in equal measure. Jake was already there, leaning against the gate with 2 steaming cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one to Sarah as she approached, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The simple contact sent a familiar warmth up her arm, a sensation she had grown to treasure over the past 2 years. How long has he been separated? Sarah asked, studying Thunder's movement patterns. About an hour, Jake replied. He's not happy about it, but he's not panicking either. That's something. Sarah nodded, sipping her coffee while she observed the stallion. Thunder had noticed their presence and stood at the far end of the corral, his head high and his ears pricked forward. He was magnificent, standing nearly 16 hands high with a coat so black it seemed to absorb the morning light. What's your plan? Jake asked, settling in beside her to watch. Patience, Sarah said simply. The first thing I need to do is let him get used to my presence. No sudden movements, no attempts to approach. Just being here. Jake glanced at her profile, noting the calm determination in her expression. This was Sarah in her element, and there was something almost magical about watching her work. How long do you think that will take? Could be hours, could be days, Sarah replied. Thunder will tell me when he's ready for the next step. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Other ranch hands began their daily routines around them. But Sarah's attention remained focused entirely on the black stallion. Thunder had stopped pacing and now stood statue still, watching them with obvious intelligence. His nostrils flared occasionally as he tested their scent on the morning breeze. And Sarah noticed the way his ears swiveled to track even the smallest sounds. He's studying us as much as we're studying him, Sarah observed. Smart horse, Jake agreed. That's part of what makes him dangerous. After an hour of simply standing and watching, Sarah made her first move. She walked slowly to the corral fence and sat down on the ground, her back against the wooden rails. Thunder's head jerked up at the movement, but when she remained still, he relaxed slightly. What are you doing? Jake asked, moving to stand protectively near her. Making myself less threatening, Sarah explained. Standing upright, I'm a predator. Sitting down, I'm just part of the landscape. Jake settled down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. The contact was comforting and distracting in equal measure, but Sarah forced herself to maintain focus on Thunder. The stallion watched them for several minutes, then began to move closer. Not directly, but in a gradual spiral that brought him nearer to their end of the corral. It was behavior Sarah had seen in wild horses before, curious but cautious, wanting to investigate but ready to flee at the first sign of danger. He's beautiful, Sarah murmured as Thunder moved into a patch of morning sunlight that highlighted every muscle and curve. So are you, Jake said quietly, the words escaping before he could stop them. Sarah turned to look at him, her green eyes wide with surprise. Jake's face had gone red beneath his tan, and he was staring fixedly at Thunder as though the horse was the most fascinating thing he had ever seen. Jake, Sarah began softly. Sorry, he said quickly. I didn't mean to. That is, I shouldn't have. Don't apologize, Sarah said, her voice gentle. I'm glad you said it. Jake finally met her eyes, and Sarah saw something vulnerable and hopeful in his expression that made her heart race. But before either of them could say more, Thunder snorted loudly, demanding their attention. The stallion had moved closer while they were distracted, now standing only about 20 feet away. His ears were forward, his posture alert but not aggressive. Sarah held her breath, afraid that any movement might break the spell. "He's never let anyone get this close without trying to strike," Jake whispered. "He's deciding whether to trust us," Sarah replied. Her voice barely audible, Thunder took another step forward, then another. His nostrils flared as he tested their scent more thoroughly. Sarah could see the intelligence in his dark eyes, the careful evaluation of threat versus curiosity. For nearly 30 minutes, the three of them remained frozen in tableau. Thunder would advance a step or two, then retreat, testing boundaries and reactions. Sarah felt as though she was holding her breath the entire time, afraid to do anything that might spook the magnificent animal. Finally, Thunder made his decision. He approached to within 10 feet of where Sarah and Jake sat, then lowered his great head and began to graze, keeping one eye on them but clearly deciding they posed no immediate threat. "Incredible," Jake breathed. "I've never seen anything like this." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the breakthrough. It was a small step, but it was progress. Thunder was beginning to trust, beginning to see them as something other than enemies. They spent the rest of the morning sitting quietly, while Thunder grazed nearby. Occasionally, the stallion would raise his head to study them, but each time he relaxed more quickly than the last. By the time the sun reached its zenith, Thunder was grazing peacefully only 6 feet away from them. "I think that's enough for today," Sarah said finally. Slowly rising to her feet, Thunder's head jerked up at her movement, and he took several steps backward. But he didn't flee to the far end of the corral. Progress. "That was amazing," Jake said as they walked away from the corral. "He actually seemed to accept your presence." "It's a start," Sarah agreed, unable to keep the smile off her face. "Tomorrow we'll see if he remembers today's lesson." As they made their way back toward the ranch house for lunch, Jake cleared his throat nervously. "Sarah, about what I said earlier, what about it?" Sarah asked, stopping to face him. Jake removed his hat and ran his fingers through his dark hair, a gesture Sarah had come to recognize as a sign of his internal struggle. "I've been wanting to say that for a long time. And a lot more besides. What's stopping you?" Sarah asked, stepping closer to him. "Fear, I guess," Jake admitted. "Fear of ruining what we have. Fear of not being good enough for someone like you. Fear of a dozen different things." Sarah reached out and placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength of muscle beneath the fabric of his shirt. "Jake, you're the best man I've ever known. You're kind and honest, and you care about people and animals more than you care about yourself." "Sarah," Jake began, but she cut him off. "I've been watching you for 2 years," she continued. "The way you gentle frightened horses, the way you look after everyone on this ranch, the way you've always made me feel safe and valued. If you think you're not good enough, then you haven't been paying attention." Jake stared down at her, his brown eyes intense with emotion. "You mean that?" "Every word," Sarah confirmed. Jake reached up to cup her face in his calloused hand, his thumb brushing gently across her cheek. "Sarah, I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you arrived here." "Think?" Sarah asked with a smile that made Jake's heart skip a beat. "No," he corrected, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I've been falling in love with you." Sarah rose up on her toes, bringing her face closer to his. "Then maybe it's time you did something about it." Jake needed no further encouragement. He lowered his head and kissed her, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence as Sarah melted against him. Her arms came up to circle his neck, and Jake pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him when they finally broke apart. Both were breathing hard and slightly dazed. "Wow," Sarah whispered. "Yeah," Jake agreed, resting his forehead against hers. "Wow." They stood there in the middle of the ranch yard, holding each other and grinning like teenagers, until the sound of approaching footsteps forced them to step apart. "Well, it's about time," came an amused voice. They turned to see Maria Santos, the ranch cook, approaching with a basket of vegetables from her garden. Maria was a small, round woman in her 50s who had been with the Double R for nearly 20 years. She was also known for having eyes in the back of her head when it came to ranch gossip. "Maria," Jake said, his face reddening again. "Don't you Maria me, Jake Martinez?" she said with a grin. "I've been waiting 2 years for you to work up the courage to kiss that girl. I was starting to think I'd have to lock you both in the barn." Sarah laughed, feeling lighter and happier than she had in years. "How did you know?" "Honey, everyone on this ranch has been waiting for you two to figure out what was obvious to the rest of us," Maria said. "The way you look at each other, the way you find excuses to work together, the way Jake gets all protective whenever anyone else so much as looks at you sideways." "I do not get protective," Jake protested weakly. Both women looked at him with raised eyebrows. "Okay. Maybe I do," he admitted. "But can you blame me?" Maria laughed and patted his arm. "Not one bit, Mio. Not one bit. Now come on, lunch is ready, and I made that cornbread you both like." As they walked toward the house together, Jake caught Sarah's hand in his, intertwining their fingers naturally. The simple gesture felt monumental to both of them, a public declaration of the change in their. The morning of Sarah's third week working with Thunder dawned crisp and clear, with autumn beginning to paint the leaves of the cottonwoods in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah stood at the corral fence, an apple in her hand and her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the moment she had been building toward for 20 days of patient, careful work. Thunder stood in the center of the corral, no longer the skittish, aggressive stallion who had been brought in 3 weeks ago. The magnificent black horse had learned to accept Sarah's presence, even seeming to look forward to their daily sessions. He would graze peacefully while she sat nearby, and he no longer startled at her voice or movements. But taking food from her hand would be the ultimate test of trust. Jake stood beside her, his tension evident in the rigid set of his shoulders, and the way his hand hovered near the gate latch, ready to intervene if necessary. The past 3 weeks had been a revelation in more ways than one. Not only had Sarah made remarkable progress with Thunder, but her relationship with Jake had deepened into something beautiful and strong. They had stolen moments together in the evenings, walking hand in hand under the stars and talking about their dreams for the future. "You don't have to do this today," Jake said quietly, his brown eyes fixed on Thunder. "You've already proven your point. Patterson's been telling everyone who'll listen about the miracle you've worked with that horse. It's not about proving a point anymore," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. "It's about finishing what we started. Thunder deserves to know he can trust humans completely." Jake nodded, understanding even as his protective instincts screamed at him to pull her away from any possible danger. He had watched Sarah work with Thunder day after day, seeing the gradual transformation in both the horse and the woman he loved. Sarah had blossomed during these weeks, her confidence growing with each small victory. Her natural gift with horses shining brighter than ever. Sarah entered the corral slowly, the apple concealed in her pocket. Thunder's head came up immediately, his ears pricked forward as he watched her approach. There was no fear in his posture now, only alert interest and something that looked almost like affection. "Good morning, beautiful boy," Sarah said softly, using the gentle tone that had become second nature during their sessions. "I brought you something special today." Thunder nickered softly, a sound Sarah had never heard him make for any other human. It was a sound of recognition, of welcome, and it made her heart soar with triumph and joy. She stopped about 6 feet away from the stallion, close enough to touch but giving him space to retreat if he chose. Thunder studied her for a moment, then took a step forward, closing the distance between them to 4 feet. It was closer than he had ever willingly come to her. "That's it," Sarah murmured. "You're such a brave boy." She slowly reached into her pocket and withdrew the apple, holding it flat on her palm. Thunder's nostrils flared as he caught the scent, and his ears swiveled forward with interest. But he made no move to approach, clearly torn between desire and lingering caution. Sarah stood perfectly still, her hand extended, letting Thunder make the choice. Behind her, she could hear Jake's breathing, quick and shallow with tension. She knew how hard this was for him, allowing her to take this risk, and she loved him even more for trusting her judgment despite his fears. Minutes passed in tense silence. Thunder would take a step forward, then back, drawn by the apple but still uncertain about coming close enough to take it. Sarah's arm began to ache from holding it extended, but she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't do anything that might break the delicate balance of the moment. Finally, Thunder made his decision. The great stallion stepped forward, stretching his magnificent neck toward Sarah's outstretched hand. His breath was warm against her palm as he delicately lifted the apple with his lips, being careful not to touch her skin with his teeth. "Good boy," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as Thunder crunched the apple. "Such a good, brave boy." Thunder finished the apple and remained close, his dark eyes soft as he studied Sarah's face. Slowly, carefully, she raised her other hand toward his neck. Thunder tensed for a moment, then relaxed as her fingers made contact with his warm coat. "Oh my God," Jake breathed from behind the fence. Sarah was actually touching Thunder, running her hand along his powerful neck while he stood calmly beside her. It was a moment of pure magic, the culmination of weeks of patient work and careful trust-building. Thunder, the untamable stallion who had injured so many men, was allowing himself to be petted like a gentle saddle horse. "You're incredible," Sarah murmured to the horse. "Absolutely incredible," Thunder seemed to agree. He lowered his head and gently nudged Sarah's shoulder with his nose, a gesture of affection that nearly knocked her off her feet with its significance. This proud, intelligent animal was choosing to show trust and friendship to a human. It was everything Sarah had dreamed of and more. She spent several more minutes with Thunder, stroking his neck and speaking to him in soft tones before slowly backing away. The stallion watched her go but made no attempt to follow, content to return to grazing while keeping one eye on his human friend. Sarah exited the corral on shaking legs, her face wet with tears of joy and triumph. Jake was there immediately, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around while whooping with excitement. "You did it!" he said, setting her down and cupping her face in his hands. "Sarah, you actually did it. I can't believe what I just saw." "He's amazing, Jake," Sarah said, her voice choked with emotion. "Absolutely amazing. All he needed was someone to show him that humans could be trusted." Jake kissed her then, pouring all his pride and love and relief into the contact. When they broke apart, both were grinning like fools. "Boss is going to flip when he hears about this," Jake said. "Hell, half the county's going to flip. You've done something no one thought was possible." Their celebration was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Boss Patterson rode up on his bay gelding, his weathered face creased with curiosity. "Morning, folks," he called out, dismounting and tying his horse to the fence. "Thought I'd check on our progress with the Black Devil. How's it going?" "See." "For yourself?" Sarah said, gesturing toward the corral where Thunder stood peacefully grazing. Patterson's eyes widened as he took in the stallion's relaxed posture. "Well, I'll be damned. He actually looks calm." "Watch this," Jake said with obvious pride. Sarah re-entered the corral, and Thunder immediately raised his head and nickered a greeting. She approached the stallion without hesitation, and he moved toward her willingly. When she reached out to stroke his neck, Thunder leaned into the touch like a cat seeking affection. "Son of a bitch," Patterson breathed. "I never thought I'd live to see the day." "He's ready to begin real training now," Sarah said as she rejoined them outside the corral. "Halter breaking, leading, eventually even riding. He's learned that humans can be partners instead of enemies." Patterson shook his head in amazement. "Miss Mackenzie, I owe you an apology. When you first asked to work with that horse, I thought you were either crazy or naive. I never imagined you could accomplish something like this." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said. "What happens to Thunder now?" Patterson was quiet for a moment, studying the magnificent stallion. "Well, I suppose that depends on what you think is best for him. You know him better than anyone now." Sarah felt her heart racing as an idea formed in her mind. It was bold, maybe too bold, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was meant to be. "Mr. Patterson," she said slowly, "what would you say to keeping Thunder here permanently? Not just as breeding stock, but as my personal horse?" Patterson's eyebrows shot up. "Your personal horse?" "Miss Mackenzie, that animal's worth a fortune as a stud." "I know," Sarah said. but he's also worth something that can't be measured in money. He's a symbol of what's possible when you choose trust over fear, patience over force. I'd like to finish his training, turn him into a working horse. Show the world that even the wildest spirit can choose partnership without losing what makes them special. Jake stared at her, seeing the passion blazing in her green eyes and feeling his love for her deepen even further. This was Sarah at her core, someone who believed in redemption and second chances, who saw potential where others saw only problems. Patterson was quiet for a long time, studying both Sarah and Thunder with equal intensity. Finally, he spoke. "If I agree to this," he said slowly, "what guarantee do I have that you'll stick around to see it through? Training a horse like Thunder is going to take years of consistent work." Sarah glanced at Jake, seeing something hopeful and nervous in his expression. "Mr. Patterson, I can't imagine being anywhere else. This ranch has become home to me in a way no place ever has before." "And what about you, Jake?" Patterson asked. "You planning to stick around too?" Jake removed his hat and ran his fingers through his hair, that familiar gesture that Sarah had come to love. "Boss, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About the future, about what I want my life to look like." He turned to Sarah, his brown eyes serious and full of emotion. "Sarah, I know this probably isn't the most romantic setting, and I don't have a ring or fancy words prepared, but I can't wait another minute." Sarah's heart stopped beating as Jake dropped to one knee right therein.